Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242, and today 42 brought back the Basement series. If you haven't seen parts 1 to 4, I recommend you go back and watch them. Today will be joining us Darek Weber, PA Nightmares, Zori Audio VA, and a little hint of Serafin the Midnight Bard. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. They sealed my body bag with an air straw poking through the plastic. As they heft me into the wet sand, I prayed the tide would drown me before the creature they had put inside of me hatched. I was never allowed into the basement. I finally found out why. Part 5. By Fleet Steps. Fenway reached for the pistol on his hip, but froze when the soldier aimed the rifle at his head.
I need you to hand that over, sir.
A coup?
Fenway asked incredulously.
Think very, very carefully about your next move, Connell. This won't go the way you think it will. I promise you that.
Fenway told him matter-of-factly. Connell apparently didn't care, since he ignored Fenway's words. He turned his attention to me.
Get dressed.
I removed the IV from my arm and slowly stood up. I instantly became lightheaded and my legs collapsed beneath me. Probably from all the meds they had pumped me with. Fenway tried to help me to my feet, but I angrily shoved him off of me. He had been pretty kind to me, but his refusal to let me return home still had me fuming. I had to remove the hospital gown to get dressed in front of them both, which was somewhat of an awkward experience. Unslinging my arm and getting it through the shirt was painstaking endeavor, but it didn't hurt quite as bad as I expected. Whatever they had done to fix my shoulder was working quick, and it was healing much faster than the medicine in my universe would have allowed. Connell pointed towards the handcuffs that had previously been tethering my arms to the hospital bed and instructed me to place them on Fenway. I guess Fenway was seen as the bigger threat between us. Probably true. Fenway, for his part, kept trying to convince Connell to give this up, but I knew he was wasting his breath. If this man was following someone like Braddis, killing for someone like her, that meant he was a fanatic, couldn't be reasoned with. Connor ushered us from the room into an empty hallway. At the end of the hallway was a pair of doors that led out to the courtyard of the compound. As we walked, I could see rooms on either side filled with scientific equipment that went way over my head. As we neared the end of the hall, gunfire could be heard from outside the door. At first, I just assumed it was the mutant-killing cannon from atop the wall. But as we got closer, I could see through the small window in the door. I realized what it was. Fenway and I froze, staring out at the carnage taking place. Outside, a full-scale firefight was taking place. All over, soldiers from the ground were using their rifles to shoot up towards the soldiers manning the wall, and the soldiers up there were returning fire with their cannons. A dozen yards away, a group of soldiers were running towards our building, carrying another whose leg was missing below the knee. I watched as they approached, and a round from the wall cannon exploded at their feet, sending them all flying. Smoke and dust filled the air, and I instinctively ducked as bits of flesh sprayed against the window. I was definitely going to need therapy once all of this was over. From behind me, the sound of pounding footsteps erupted, and I whipped around just in time to see someone barrel into Connell. Connell's rifle went flying out of his hands, and the two of them landed in a triangle on the ground. Connell quickly emerged on top, however, and he sent a fury of powerful fists into his attacker's face, which prompted several shrieks of pain. As Connell pulled back to deliver another blow, I was shocked to realize his assailant was my surgeon, Tara. For some reason, I couldn't help but notice that although I had initially thought Tara to be a decade my senior, now that she had changed out of her doctor's scrubs, it was clear that she was probably only a few years older than me. The stunt she had just pulled was pretty badass too. I know, not the time or the place. Fenway wasted no time. He delivered a powerful kick to Connell's temple, causing the latter to roll off of Tara. Dropping to the ground, Fenway pulled the chains of his handcuffs under Colin's neck and began strangling him. Colin scrambled to escape and began desperately trying to dig his fingers under the chain. When that wouldn't work, he reached his arms back to attack Fenway's face and managed to land a few deep gashes on his cheek.
Why?
Fenway screamed out.
Why? Why?
He gave just enough slack in the chain for Connell to choke out the answer.
She promised me a spot.
Enraged, Fenway began to slam Connell's head into the ground, over and over. He continued long after Connell's face had turned into a bloody pulp. The man was certainly dead, but Fenway continued until Tara let out a pained moan. Fenway gave a look of concern and finally dropped the lifeless body to the ground. He used Connell's key to uncuff himself. Fenway began gingerly checking over Tara, who had managed to pull herself a few feet away. Her eyes were badly swollen, but her nose was leaking blood, and she seemed fine. All things considered, she'd live, at least.
Aaron, help me get her up. We have to—
No! I interrupted. Fenway looked up at me, and anger and annoyance filled his face as he realized his mistake. While he had been dealing with Connell, I had picked up the dropped rifle and was using my good arm to point it at him. I am going the fuck home, I said slowly to emphasize my point. I'm going to go home, save my sister, and forget about this cursed fucking place.
Take a look outside, Aaron. How do you think we're gonna do that? If Brandis wins, do you think for a second she's just gonna hand over the bridge and let you be on your way? If my men win, do you think they'll just let you go after shooting me?
Fenway pointed to a security camera above us, showing that everything happened was on record.
I'm your best chance to survive right now. Your only chance.
I frowned. I hated to admit it, but Fenway was right. But I also couldn't just give up the only leverage I've had in my entire time on this cursed planet. Fuck. Then we go to my universe. I don't care if you don't think it's safe. That's the only way you live right now. You give me your word that you will let me go home. That's your only chance to survive right now. I truly don't know if I actually could have shot Fenway in that moment, or if it was just a convincing bluff. Luckily, I didn't have to find out. Fenway cursed and thought it over for a moment.
Fine. We'll go to your universe. You have my word.
He could have just easily been lying, but Fenway didn't strike me as the type. I handed the rifle to him and helped him lift Tara to a sitting position against the wall. The bleeding had stopped, but she still seemed a little out of it. Fenway and I made our way to the windows to get a better look at the battle still raging outside. According to Fenway, it seemed like the 150 so soldiers fighting from the ground were loyal to him. The remaining few dozen soldiers manning the wall had been trained under Bratis, and they were hers. Though she herself was nowhere to be seen. The couple of staircases leading to the top of the walls had been barricaded as well, and any attempt to approach by Fenway's men was quickly met with a barrage of cannon rounds. Luckily, both sides seemed to be ignoring the housing building, which, according to Fenway, contained all the soldiers' families. Instead, most of the fighting was focused further out towards the helipad. The hovercraft returning with the bridge, Fenway's men, were attempting to land, but whenever it started to descend, soldiers from the wall would fire their cannons at the ground beneath it, forcing it back into the air. Fenway's men were attempting to provide cover fire, but every time they showed themselves, a cannon round would blast them apart.
It's smart. I have the numbers, so she made sure she'd have the high ground and superior firepower.
Fenway pointed towards the hovercraft.
There's another helipad on top of the wall. She knows the craft won't have much fuel left after the trip, and they're trying to force it to land up there. That way, they can take control of the bridge. I bet you anything Brandis is waiting up there too, so she can use it as soon as possible. That's probably why she didn't have Connell just kill us. She doesn't know how to operate it, so she needs one of us to.
So, you got a plan or something? I asked skeptically.
Or something.
Fenway's plan was shitty, but when I told him so, he had just asked me if I had a better one. I didn't, but that still didn't make his plan any less shitty. Since most of the fighting had centered around the hovercraft on the other side of the compound, that meant that there were only a couple on the end we were near. The two soldiers were clearly focused on the battle, which meant that Fenway, Tara, and I were able to use the building as cover and approach them undetected. With expert aim, Fenway fired 2 rounds in quick succession and dropped both of the soldiers instantly. Fenway wasn't too happy about Tara coming along in her injured state, but she had recovered her senses and quite forcefully stated she wasn't staying behind. I was pretty shocked she was so willing to argue with her superior, and even more shocked when the colonel relented. Ultimately, though, I had seen weirder since arriving here. Fenway had explained that on either side of the wall were 6-inch thick metal sliding doors, and between those doors, the walls were hollow, sort of like an airlock. Inside the compartment, there were also maintenance entrances that led to the wall's top surface.
With the man on the walls not shooting them, the mutants will be starting to pile up out there. I'll use my override code to open the door for a moment, and then open the maintenance doors. We'll just let a couple get in. They won't be expecting it at all, so I bet they get the majority of Brandis' people. At the very least, they'll cause a good distraction.
And if more than a couple get in? I asked, to which Fenway said,
They won't.
And if they get loose inside the compound? I asked, to which Fenway just said,
They won't.
I said it was a shitty plan. As we approached the large touchscreen on the wall, Fenway gazed up and cursed. The crew in the hovercraft seemed to finally give up, and they were floating it towards the helipad on the wall.
Voice authorization required,
the touchscreen announced.
James Fenway confirmed. Tango, Charlie, Foxtrot.
Fenway continued rattling off his code. When he was done, I heard the hydraulic hiss sound coming from the wall, and immediately my ears filled with the sound of howling mutants. I shivered, knowing the only thing between us was 6 inches of metal. After seeing what they could do, it didn't feel like nearly enough. Fenway slammed a red button on the screen, and the hydraulics hissed again before most of the howls were cut off. Now only a couple snarls could be heard within the compartment. Fenway touched another button, and we heard the maintenance doors slide open, and the creatures' snarls dissipated as they made their way inside the wall. We waited a few minutes and watched as the hovercraft descended before getting obscured by the wall.
Should be long enough. Let's go.
Fenway said. He opened the front gate of the wall and gestured towards the dark maintenance entrance inside the now empty compartment. Shitty plan. Fenway took the lead, followed by myself and Tara bringing up the rear. Somehow, Fenway led us through the pitch darkness, and we were blindly moving up and through the wall. I began to wonder if the mutants had even reached the top. Maybe they were still inside here with us, waiting in the shadows to rip our throats out as we walked by. From far off, an inhuman howl raged out, and I jumped back into Tara, almost sending us both tumbling. Luckily, she caught us and without a word grabbed my hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Soon after, we heard the sound of screams mixed with inhuman howling. The mutants had made their way to the top and were hopefully dismantling Bradis' soldiers. As we reached the top, we could see the metal hatch leading to the surface was torn to shreds. Fenway told us to stick close and peeked his head through before motioning us to follow into the daylight. We emerged into a blood-filled nightmare scene. Body parts and unidentified pieces of flesh covered almost every surface. Deep claw marks lined the floor beneath us. A few 100 feet or so down the wall was a helipad, and I could see 2 mutants laying waste to the soldiers above the wall. On the ground, Fenway's soldiers were using the chaos up here to regroup. They began dismantling the barricades, but it was slow work. On the helipad, the few who remained of Bradis' soldiers were desperately trying to fend off the mutants, but up close like this, the mutants were too quick. We ducked down and watched as they were quickly sliced to shreds. After a moment, they seemed to lose interest though, and began sprinting along the wall towards a few more of Bradis' men who were making a break for it. Luckily, away from us. "I don't see Bradis anywhere," I whispered to Fenway as we cautiously approached the helipad.
Maybe they got her,
he responded. I had to hold back a chuckle. That'd be way too lucky. It wasn't long before I was proven wrong, though. Recently, I had daydreamed about shooting Helen Bradis quite often, so I'm slightly ashamed to admit that I was actually pretty disappointed when we found her dismembered head laying on the ground next to the hovercraft. Her mouth was frozen open in an endless silent scream, and her eyes were wide open. A few feet away, the rest of her body lay on the ground, still clutching a metal case. I quickly snatched the case and opened it to see a milky white orb sitting inside. I hugged it to my chest. Awesome fucking plan. Fenway walked towards me and bent down to examine Bradis' head and body. With a look of disgust, he grabbed the head by the short blonde hair and chucked it over the wall.
Good riddance,
Fenway muttered before turning to look at me. His eyes grew wide, and he immediately raised his rifle to aim at something beyond me. Without looking, I knew the 2 mutants were returning, because of course they were. I turned around and saw 2 giant blurs of gray hurling towards us at an alarming rate. Fenway began to fire, and he managed to drop one before the rifle clicked empty. He threw the weapon down in disgust before drawing his pistol.
Get behind me, Aaron.
Shitty fucking plan! A deafening roar cracked through the air and the mutant's arm evaporated. However, the thing barely seemed to notice and continued bounding towards us. I turned around to see Tara holding a blood-covered cannon. She fired again, and this time, the mutant's head exploded.
Didn't think he'd need this anymore,
she said, gesturing towards half a body on the ground some distance away. She gave me a small smile, which I weakly returned. She was really kind of badass. The rest of Fenway's men had finally broke through the barricades, and the colonel quickly snatched the metal case out of my hands. I began to protest, but in an instant he handed it off to another soldier.
Major Wynn, gently take this and young Aaron here to my office, immediately. Don't let either out of your sight, and keep Aaron in the hall with you until I arrive.
About 3 hours later, Fenway had finally arrived with Tara, and the 3 of us entered his office, while Major Wynn stood guard outside.
My apologies for the wait, Aaron. I had to make sure no more of the mutants were in the walls, and we had to round up the last of Brandis' traitors.
Did you kill them? I asked.
Do you care?
Nope. Fenway grabbed the metal case and opened it, placing the bridge down on the desk between us. Tara had randomly started to cry, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, feeling awkward. Fenway gestured towards her, and she placed a syringe full of mutant halting serum next to it.
Go save your sister, Aaron.
You're ready to leave? I asked. Fenway smiled, but his eyes revealed sadness.
Apart from a trusted few, my people think the bridge was destroyed in the battle. There's hundreds of people here, Aaron, more than could ever make the trip. I can't make the choice of who comes and who gets left behind, and I can't abandon them either.
Personally, I figured saving some would be better than none at all, but who was I to argue with the man? I also didn't care as long as I could go home.
However, I do have one very selfish condition, Aaron. My daughter is coming with you. She deserves more than life behind these walls.
Fenway looked towards Tara, who wiped away a few tears. Your daughter? I said in surprise. It made sense though. Deal, let's go. I smiled. A nice, big, full smile that felt like the first time I had smiled in years. As I input the symbols Tom had written down for me, the orb began to fill with a brilliant neon green, strands of cosmic purple lacing through. I remembered my great-uncle's words and told the nervous Tara to make sure she breathed out all the air in her lungs. She nodded, and when I was done, I gave the orb a small one-fingered push the same way I'd seen Tom do. It started to spin faster and faster, and I prepared for the excruciating pain that would come next. As I left this nightmare behind, I only had one thought in my mind. Hang on, May. I'm coming. Little did I know, I was only trading this nightmare for another. I told my friend that I simply forgot to water her plant. I didn't forget, since a plant that thrives on blood shouldn't be allowed to live. I do hope you enjoyed this story, and if you did, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. Of course, we're going to continue this as well, so you better subscribe so you don't miss part 6. I would like to thank Darek Weber, PA Nightmares, Zori Audio VA, and, of course, Serafin the Midnight Bard for lending their voices to this great story. If you'd like to help this channel/podcast, share it with anyone who might enjoy it. If you'd like to help in other ways, I do have a Patreon, merch, and PayPal. All the links are down below, including my website, www.242reads.com, which has links to all my socials and some of my stories that I've already read on this channel, if you like to read them. And of course, I would love a comment, but I gotta get you that Sunday word first. Now, last week's word was reconcile, which on screen right now, and will be on Twitter, will have all the comments I got last week. Thank you everyone for your submissions. And this Sunday word is essential. ESSENTIAL, which means extremely important and necessary, or very basic, fundamental. So, if you're on YouTube, leave me a comment down below using this word, and you'll be in next week's video. If you're on the podcast, go to my Twitter, @me, and use this word as well. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It really means the world to me, and as of recording this, we are just shy of 500 subscribers on this channel, which is crazy. Thank you guys so much. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.